Hello, friends. Because of the unfortunate state of censorship, deplatforming, and misinformation, I issue this disclaimer. This show is for entertainment purposes. The views of my guests do not necessarily reflect that of my own. Always use discernment and enjoy this episode.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Duane Hayes. First, a couple of announcements. The Forbidden documentary, Doors of Perception, will be available for you to download the special edition pre-release version by the end of the month. If you'd like to put in your order now, it's only $5. Email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. It will also be available soon on Vimeo, and we will have a downloadable version for you to purchase through Buy Me a Coffee. Also, watch the first documentary, Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. That's a great way to help support Forbidden Knowledge News. It's available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. You can also download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker. That's always free for you. We are booking guests for March and April. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Duane Hayes. In 2012, as a defense to the increasing government tyranny, he chose the two most revolutionary of acts, telling the truth and growing his own food. He is founder of the History of Propaganda and co-founder of Bulletproof Publishers. Duane, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me, Chris. Looking forward to our talk on the Technate today.
Yes, man. I'm very much looking forward to this. Always enjoy your presentations. We're going to continue with yet another about the history of propaganda, culture creation, and moral degradation of the United States, along with the implementation of the technocratic state. Today, your presentation is titled The Technate of America and the Myth of Human Progress. And in my perspective, these types of presentations are essential for everyone to hear, and especially those that are just waking up to the nature of our systems. You do a great job putting this information together, and it's very easy for people to understand the nature of the psychopaths that we're dealing with. Now, before we get too deep into this, just remind the audience where they can find you.
Right. You can find me at bulletproofpub.com. The History of Propaganda on YouTube. Come find me on Twitter at Trivium Method, all one word. And then I'm Diego Garcia on Facebook. This is where we're really laying all of this technocratic history, how it connects to progressivism. And there was a well-said introductory statement by you in that this is very important for people to understand. And what we're showing now is that actually people are so focused on the technocracy and this movement of the 1930s that we're missing the actual lesson to be learned, the moral of the story, and that is the progressive era. This is where the technocracy came out of. And so today we're going to show you, we're going to start with a video on another podcaster talking about the technocracy, and then we're going to show you how they don't quite see the progressive era, and they're still sitting there kind of confused as to the directions that Trump is going and whether this is good or bad. And we're seeing a nation really in total narcotized dysfunction. There's just so much information that everybody's just whipped up into this fomented current of opinion, contradictory opinion, that a lot of people are left asking, can somebody make sense of all of this? And so that's really what our whole goal was.
Right on.
So, yeah, you can find me at all those spots.
Perfect. I'm very much looking forward to learning more about this. Where should we start with your presentation?
Okay, so first of all, perception and perspective are two different things. Okay, so what we're seeing a lot of is people with perceptions, looking at things through their personalized, biased, prejudiced filters. And we're trying to get everybody to move to a perspective, to an understanding, an accumulation of knowledge and information to fill that perception so that we can more accurately and properly see our world today, because it is critical right now. This is the moment where we may have a say in what our future world looks like, but in real time, we see things moving so fast. They're trying to out-accelerate us. So as an answer, we're trying to really get this information out as quick as possible. And really this Technate information, the involvement with Elon Musk going back to all of this in the 30s is critical for people to understand, because then we will not fall for the same mistakes we've done for over 4 generations and 120 years now.
Right on.
Okay.
And I'm sure you'll be tying in some of what we're experiencing now with what you're going to be presenting today.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're going to start with a quick 20-minute video here. And I'm not going to stop it because this really lays out exactly where we're at right now. And then we're going to talk about how this connects to progressivism, fill in the holes that this interviewer darts in letters. First of all, thanks for putting this out. It's great. He's put out Technocracy Now, Part 1. So looking forward to seeing Part 2. But this is a sign that we are starting to see the progressive trick, this trick of words. So we'll fill in all of the blanks after this. Okay. Can you see Elon Musk there? And I'm going to full screen him. Does that work for you? Okay. Now I'm just going to press play. And if the volume has got any issues,
I'll
just let me know.
Take care of it here. Right on.
I want to tell you a story of Elon Musk and why he is the way that
he is. You got it?
But it's actually a story about his grandfather.
I got no volume, but that's fine as long as your volume's good.
Like me, Handelman lived in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. Unlike me, Handelman was a technocrat. Now, today, people use that word to describe obtuse policy wonks or centrist Democrats. Basically, it's a political slur. Nobody actually calls themselves a proud technocrat. But Handelman did. He was literally part of a political movement called Technocracy Incorporated, and he was head of the Canadian chapter. Handelman and Technocracy Incorporated hoped to turn North America into a continent-wide Technate. This was to be a techno-utopia governed by science and expertise. Handelman's movement was led by a mysterious figure named Howard Scott.
There's not a lot known about his background, and he was a bit of a fabulist in the sense that he made up stuff about himself. He created Technocracy Incorporated in 1933 and led it until he died in 1970. And he was both his biggest asset and his biggest liability.
This is Ira Basin, a radio documentarian that works at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He produced an excellent CBC Ideas documentary on this very subject. It's called Welcome to the Technate. We called him up to ask him about what he learned. Ira tells us that Howard Scott was this eccentric, imposing figure. I'm talking 6'5". He stood out and he really knew how to command a room.
And this really comes across when you listen to him. He was a great speaker. He had a great deep voice because he was a chain smoker, and chain smokers often have, it's kind of cruel that way, often have great voices for radio.
Now, as far as technocracy's ideas are concerned, we're so far left that we make communism look bourgeois.
Scott's radical claim was that engineers should run society. And like any good engineer, he presented his claim in the most technical of terms. He made technocracy seem natural and inevitable.
He was clearly very smart, not as smart as he thought he was, but he was a very smart guy. Could ream off like facts and figures, was apparently trained as an engineer.
It was really an inspiring vision, in some ways. They wanted to throw out capitalism and install a more rational political order. They promised everyone a life of plenty, and they were making this promise when things couldn't have been further from that reality. This was the Great Depression.
So they looked around, as many people did in the 1930s, and said, what's wrong here? Like, why, how could this possibly be happening when we have so much wealth and so much abundance, and look at how much poverty and homelessness and devastation and hunger there is? And their answer was that the economic system and the political system had not made the shift from scarcity to abundance.
Howard Scott thought that we humans hadn't made really much progress at all until the Industrial Revolution. And the way that he measured progress was through energy. That's what he based his entire political theory on. It was literally an energy theory of politics. And it asked a simple question. Could humans produce more energy than they consumed? Scott said that for the vast majority of our history, we couldn't. But now, we were getting there.
Remember that we stated years ago that when the producing mechanism in the United States, on or before the consumption of extraneous energy, reached 200,000 kilogram calories per capita per day, that when it reached that, the majority of healthy, able-bodied citizens would no longer be required to produce and distribute the physical wealth of this continent.
Yet, this wealth wasn't coming. Even though the technology was there, the problem was that the political system wasn't lined up with that technology.
It's only a question of time, and a very short time at that, because every new advance on the technical field is producing more and more with less and less. And how are you going to distribute the great production of abundance of this technological complex to a social system that is back in the days of George Washington? That's the problem. And they cannot meet it under this system.
These ideas really took shape for Scott around 1918. He was a bohemian living in Greenwich Village, and he got in with some famous intellectuals. One of those intellectuals was named Thorstein Veblen, and Veblen's ideas transfixed Scott. Veblen was this iconoclastic economist who coined a number of memorable concepts. Concepts like conspicuous consumption and conspicuous waste. Anytime you're condemning the rich for their frivolity and their wastefulness, you're probably using some words that Veblen came up with. Honestly, there's a lot I like about Veblen, but he's kind of weird. He's an idiosyncratic thinker. His revolutionary theory certainly is not a Marxist one. It's not focused on workers versus the ruling class. It's much more focused on certain psychosocial pathologies of specific elites and specific institutions, like the corporation. Veblen looked closely at the top companies, and he saw a conflict between the financial and the industrial elites. Basically, this was lazy owners versus industrious engineers. Veblen said that the owners wanted to just maximize profits, so to do that, they cut back production. But the hardworking engineers were completely different.
And so he came up with this idea that, in fact, rather than venerate kind of businessmen and politicians, that engineers would be kind of the vanguard of the new society.
Veblen proposed a very strange concept, the Soviet of Engineers. He gave engineers advice on how they could overthrow the current social and political order.
Which was a kind of an odd sort of concept, and one that not many engineers themselves bought into. This idea of the cult of the engineer kind of originated with Veblen, and this was really the kind of foundation for technocracy.
Scott took Veblen's ideas and built a circle of technocratic intellectuals. They called themselves the Technical Alliance, and they were based at Columbia University. This was kind of a research group, and they hoped to chart the entire U.S. industrial system. Scott did a lot of this kind of work, and it really excited people, including the international workers of the world. He became the chief evangelist for technocracy, and honestly, he was a pretty good one. In the early 1930s, technocrats routinely got glowing press coverage. They even got more features than FDR did at the time. This is according to William Atkins' book, Technocracy and the American Dream. Basically, very briefly, technocracy was the darling of progressive intellectuals, journalists, and policy elites. It was the most exciting idea of the time, even though it was a very radical idea.
What they saw as the central problem was what they called the price system. And at the root of the price system was money. Money that was not rooted in anything, right? It was essentially a social convention that everybody agreed, okay, this dollar is worth so much.
Scott proposed a radical new currency.
The currency, which was not called money, but was called energy certificates, would be based on how much energy went into producing something. After you've determined how much energy there is within the Technate, then you divide that by the number of people who live within the Technate, and that gives you the number of energy certificates that you have to distribute. And you distribute them equally to everybody over the age of 25.
This was a technologically enabled vision of perfect equality.
And it turns out, didn't require that much labor, right? So in the Technate, you wouldn't join the labor force until you're 25 years old. Then you'd retire when you were 45. In the meantime, you'd only have to work 16 hours a week, and you'd get 78 days of vacation.
There's a catch, though. This is not a democracy. It is a straightforward meritocracy. Scott's slogan was government by science, social control through the power of technique. This puts the most intelligent experts in charge. So if you're not one of them, you are going to lose some freedoms. But Scott insisted that this trade was worth it.
The most common fear of the American people is having their freedom, of losing their freedom. How will technocracy compensate us? Individual liberty. Well, what freedom have you got if you haven't got the economic wherewithal to go with it?
However, when journalists started to look closer into Scott, they found out that he wasn't exactly who he said he was. He didn't have much technical training. He did run a factory at one point, but he was actually fired for incompetence. He also didn't have the best personality. He gave this famous radio address in 1933, but it ended very poorly. When the crowd started peppering him with difficult questions, he completely lost his temper and just refused to answer. This was a huge embarrassment for the movement. But Scott's biggest weakness was not his technical bona fides or even his personality. It was his political theory of change. Even though he predicted radical technological change, he offered no radical political program to get you there. He thought, if you let nature take its course, technocracy will just inevitably come about. The technocrats then, all they have to do is research to prepare for this inevitable transition. This incensed Veblen and the other technocrats. They wanted a political program. Scott just refused to give them one. And incidentally, this was all happening at the very same time there was a radical new political program being offered. The New Deal.
A prompt program applied as quickly as possible seemed to me not only justified, but imperative to our national security.
The New Deal was like technocracy light. FDR famously had an expert brain trust. He embraced radical progressive reformers, and he flexed the muscles of government planning to lift the U.S. out of the Great Depression.
First, we are giving opportunity of employment to 250,000 of the unemployed, especially the young men who have dependents, to let them go into...
But FDR also knew a thing or two about political organizing and political persuasion. He mobilized against the financial elites, and he encouraged labor organizing. His administration even produced impressive propaganda and created lavish buildings and radical artistic production. He basically brought technocratic ideas and populist ones together. For some technocrats, this was an opportunity, albeit an imperfect one, but still an opportunity. For others, it was simply a perversion.
When Roosevelt became president of the United States and brought in the New Deal, some of the people that were involved in the Technical Alliance went to the New Deal because they thought that they could, make changes, and Howard Scott wasn't interested in any of that.
It's not only the New Deal. Some technocrats also form different technocratic organizations, one with a more compelling political vision. or they turn to Upton Sinclair's Socialist Party. It's a total splintering. But Scott holds the course.
And so they went off, and he was left and started this organization called Technocracy Incorporated in 1933 and led it for the rest of his life.
Technocracy Inc. becomes a quasi-social / research group. But the splintering had done its damage. That very same year, 1933, the press declares that technocracy is dead. It definitely gets supplanted by FDR and later by World War II. Then you have the post-war boom and enormous economic growth. In that context, people just sort of forget about technocracy.
Life was good, right? And then you get to the 1960s, and Scott is still out there preaching technocracy. But in the 1960s, there were lots of other like protest movements that were going on that he really wasn't all that relevant anymore. And he died on New Year's Day, 1970. And one of the problems that they had is that he had no interest in training anybody to succeed him. And so when he died, they really had nobody to pick up the reins. And they've been kind of a weird little rump organization ever since.
But they do still exist. Our producer Mark Apollonio reached out to Technocracy Inc.'s youngest board member, Parker Doobie. He's a PhD student in bioengineering. And just like the OG technocrats, what he mostly does is research.
All technocrats should study technocracy continuously. And so it's not just about going through the fundamental texts like the study course or the words and wisdom of Howard Scott, things of that nature. Basically, when I say study technocracy, it's not just that, but you also have to study everything that's currently going on around the world all the times. And so I'm studying everything from Native American culture to nuclear engineering sometimes, trying to gather a
Doobie says that recruiting new members is tough because the concepts are very complex. So he acknowledges Technocracy Inc. is currently in a lull.
However, I see that as we see more and more economic disparity, economic problems, economic woes, it'll be what occurred during the Great Depression. Individuals will go looking for possible solutions to what they perceive as problems, and will be one of the top.
Which brings me back to Saskatchewan. Weirdly, for reasons I can't quite explain, it seems that technocracy held on the longest in Western Canada. Like I said before, Joshua N. Handelman was the Canadian head of Technocracy Inc. Remember, Handelman is Elon Musk's grandfather. Handelman left the group during World War II because Technocracy Inc. agreed that the U.S. should collaborate with the Soviet Union in the fight against fascism. Handelman just did not approve of that because he was so staunchly anti-communist. After that, he turned even more rightward. Handelman joined the Social Credit Party. That party follows the principles of C.H. Douglas, and guess what he does for a living? An engineer. Their social credit idea is basically handing out money. It was a kind of proto-UBI. I think of it as a less radical version of technocracy's energy certificates. But social credit gave technocratic ideas a new kind of spin. They weren't just engineers, they were social conservatives. It was like a party of religious right-wing populists. And they ended up being very anti-communist, pro-eugenics, anti-labor, and full of anti-Semites. But their pitch actually worked better than technocracies ever did. In 1935, they formed government in the Canadian province of Alberta. They stayed in power there in one form or another until 1971. Handelman never did land a seat in government, though. He eventually gave up on his efforts with social credit, and he left Canada entirely. He thought it was becoming too socialist and too immoral. So he moved to the most moral place on earth, apartheid South Africa. He became an aviator and an adventurer, and he spent the rest of his days flying around looking for a legendary lost city. That's according to his obit in the Journal of the Canadian Chiropractic Association. He never did find that city. He died in a plane crash when Elon Musk was 3 years old. The parallels here are pretty obvious. On the one hand, you have Joshua Handelman, the right-wing aviator, and on the other, you have Elon Musk, the right-wing space adventurer.
Elon has texted that he's big on going to Mars and wants to not just go there, but colonize and set up a city of 1 million people, and has referred to it as a Martian Technate. It was not clear what he meant by that.
Okay, that's the important part. is that you guys understand that there is such a thing as the technocracy. And so now I want to contemplate whether or not Elon Musk is actually trying to resurrect all of this. I'll bring up another document if I can here.
You look at the people that initiated these ideas and these ideologies, and they're people like intellectuals, engineers. Now, I'm in no way saying that all engineers or intellectuals are psychopaths. It just seems that those that gravitate to these specific positions of power have those tendencies. They have no understanding of what your everyday human being goes through in life, the regular everyday emotions, because these people are, for lack of a better word, disconnected nerd dorks that don't have the same human emotions as most people. And they're looking at life through that lens. And these are the type of people that unfortunately rise to power because, honestly, most of them have slightly psychotic tendencies as well. And these are the people that end up putting forward these ideas. And that is how we end up with this technocratic state, right?
Yep. And so today we are seeing no better of an example of how this all works than this Technate, Elon Musk holding court in the Oval Office while Donald Trump just sits and listens. This is really, the three tenets of progressivism are preparedness, efficiency, and trust the science. So we can go deep into all three of those and point out all of the problematic issues that come from, giant defense budgets in the name of preparedness. So Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, we often complain about, the Department of Defense being one of the largest employers in the world. Right? These are giant elephants that have been sitting in the room for a long time. Efficiency is really Musk's role here. You look at DOGE, it's Department of Governmental Efficiency. Okay, so there's a direct connection through the language. And so they're looking to make this world far more efficient. Now I bring everybody's attention to the Northwest Passage. Now that is a path up through here through Canadian waters that if it was ever to open up and they were to use that as an actual shipping transportation line, which they've already opened up. There's been one successful run from Vancouver to Finland through there. And so this is really what they're thinking. And if that ever was to open up and become an actual transportation causeway, Canada would be one of the leaders in the world all of a sudden. And I think that this all centers around the Arctic and the Northwest Passage, the Northeast Passage that's on the other side that Russia has. And so this is a changing of perception into perspective here. We are used to looking at the Mercator map and the normal boundaries and borders that we see in North America. Well, here's a changing of perspective when which I don't recommend we do, when we listen to the mainstream media talking about Greenland, the ownership of Greenland, the ownership of Panama Canal, the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, which has already happened. The Alberta Premier here in Canada are talking about removing provincial borders. Our own PM, our dead man walking PM, Justin Castro, on his way out, is talking about annexation by America of Canada. So, Musk's grandfather being a founder of the Canadian technocracy starts to put all of this together. We see the connections today with efficiency back to progressivism and, this ominous continuity that goes through the technocratic movement. It's pretty hard to make an argument against this, that this is really where we're going, this sort of one step away from a one world government. I'm already seeing where news outlets and people are proposing that because at the top of this, of the Arctic, we connect real close to the Scandinavian countries, Sweden and Finland and all of those, that they are actually the next to join. So we're seeing this move that for a long time, Chris, you and I have contemplated whether we would see it in our lifetime. Well, here it is. The Technate of America is really what's being driven home. We looked at, if you listen to the inauguration speech of Trump, he mentions manifest destiny. When we go look in the Oval Office, and I've shared this on Facebook, we see that, each president gets to bring in their own statues and paintings and busts of those that inspire them, and they're indicative of the direction that they want to go. Now, the Resolute desk was built from the HMS Resolute that was lost up in the Arctic looking for the Northwest Passage. When they decommissioned that ship, the Queen, and gave it back to the Queen made that Resolute desk and gave it back to America as a gift. Now, that Resolute desk has basically been used by every president since Carter, but there's a direct continuity there all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt and McKinley, this manifest destiny. When we look at Abraham Lincoln and William Gilpin, who's a major proponent of manifest destiny, so we're talking early 1800s to mid 1800s, he draws up this Gilpin's Cosmopolitan map that shows a railway that goes across the Great Bering Sea. We see Trump connecting back to Lincoln through busts that he's personally chose to be there. Also of Theodore Roosevelt, who's a key guy in the establishment of this international movement. Theodore Roosevelt, 1907, is really the catalyst to bringing the international movement together. And so when the guy was talking about communism, it's really what we're talking about is internationalism, because you can go back to the first international movement, and Karl Marx is there as a journalist, and he's the main factor, the main figure, historical figure there. So, we're looking at this and we're thinking it's a no-brainer that this is really where they're going. So I encourage everybody to share that.
Well, it's a no-brainer for folks like yourself and myself, but I have been warning for the longest time that what we're seeing with this administration is a trap. It's a sleight of hand. They're showing you all the wonderful things that are going to get the people that are Trump supporters even more wrapped up in everything, and those that are on the fence looking at it like, oh, he's doing some good things. Maybe I should give it a chance while he's doing all these things. The other hand is dipped in Israel, dipped in the technocratic state, and rolling it out as you're paying attention to all the other stuff.
Yep. That's exactly what I'm telling people on Facebook right now. Change your perspective to perception and look at the other hand. Don't look at what this hand is doing. Look at the other one. We should have learned this by now. And this is the progressive trick. So Buddy was talking, you see how he dances around progressivism in that 20-minute video that we showed? He even says progress a couple times, but he doesn't say progressivism. And you can see that he's kind of confused as to where this is all going. But once you understand the progressive era, the stuff that you and I have gone through on the 4 or 5 shows that I've been on here, I encourage everybody to go back and find those and look at how progressivism was first established in America, and you'll see direct continuity to the technocracy, okay? And why this is important is because the answers and solutions are in the progressive era, not the technocracy. So we see people like Derek Brose, a lot of these larger alternative figures, they don't want to talk to me about progressivism. I've been blocked, muted, all kinds of things from the tragedy and hope community to, even bigger names that you would recognize. They just don't want to touch the progressive era because that's where the solutions are. And I think that this is really what is being kept by the gatekeepers. We talk about controlled opposition, limited hangouts, gatekeepers. Well, what information are they holding back from us? This, it's I can't share this article on Facebook. So I screenshot it, but I want you guys. Oh, and what is interesting is that I didn't know that, but Ira Basin is actually the author of this article too, which is who they cited in that video. So I'm just putting that together now.
Now, for those listening on the audio go over to Rumble if you'd like to see the visual presentation.
Yeah, and you can look for In Science We Trust, a CBC article that goes into the technocracy. Ira Basin, Basen, and he goes in there and proves that it's Joshua Haldeman, Haldeman. That's the actual uncle of Elon Musk. And so there's really very little room to argue here of where this is all going. We're seeing the resurrection of the technocracy by the grandson of the founder in Canada. To me, there's just no doubt. So I'm going to try to find this incredible admission here. See if I can find it. In the Club of Rome article right here. Now, does that come up on your screen, or do I have to share that separately?
I know,
did that
the page did
come
not
up on
come
its
up.
own? Okay. So I'll just stop sharing. I'll bring this up because this is really where it comes from. We're seeing direct connections back to the Club of Rome, this study that they did in the 70s about making us the enemy, where humanity itself becomes the enemy. Okay. And so for those that are unfamiliar with the Club of Rome, this is really our social engineers trying to figure out ways to better control us. Okay. So the common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new, and this is their conclusion, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, those phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. Okay?
When was this written?
So this is the first global revolution. So this is written in the 80s as a follow-up or an addendum to the Club of Rome. They're basically just laying out what has been achieved by this Club of Rome study. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. I mean, we need to connect to source here. This is really important. We need to connect to source. Go to the book yourself, read that paragraph yourself, go to the front of the book, look at the first printing dates, look at who's printing these, who's publishing them. This is really one of the most important things we can do is check our sources.
The plan has been documented thoroughly. You just have to find it.
Yeah. This is the incredible thing is that we found this progressive era, bulletproofpub.com. Not many people are even talking about it. And it's really because we stayed focused. We were more interested on having a perspective, not getting distracted by the spectacle. This is what we see pretty much everybody falling under. I just shared something where a guy was saying that if there was one thing he could do to help humanity the most, it would be to have them understand that there's a difference between perception and perspective. We spend a lot of time fighting our perceptions with each other. This is why we get into right-wrong conversations and they're futile. We can't continue to have the same thinking that got us into this. So we have to raise our awareness and our thinking changing our perspectives. And so I think that this Technate does that. It allows us to see even the world from a different perspective, because now we're talking about the Arctic Circle, the top of the Earth. So when we start talking about One Belt, One Road initiative, the new Silk Road, we start to see everybody presenting the images of the Earth from an azimuthal projection equidistant map, not the Mercator. Okay, so you can start to see why the Mercator is here to give us a perception of things. And we already know the Mercator is a deeply propagandized piece of material. Countries are much larger and smaller than they're supposed to be. And it centers on sort of European, German sort of thought. And so come find me, Diego Garcia at Facebook. Come find me at Trivium Method on Twitter. We're sharing all of this stuff. We're showing how RFK is a part of this because he's just took a picture with some Jewish funders in front of Zabbatai Zevi's painting. He's totally supportive of Zionist ideology, and we know that what's going on in Palestine is a major problem for the entire world, right? So, we are seeing these puppets. They're being, and same with Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard. This is somebody else that people are falling in love with. But this is because we have perceptions and we identify with people that we've never met. And we haven't learned our lesson yet that anytime a politician's lips are moving, they're lying. So we must understand this progressive era. We got to understand that efficiency, preparedness, and trust the science are steering us down a road to hell through, what's the saying? Good intentions. Right. It's this trick that and Trump and Musk are doing it right now. And you can see that everybody's, a lot of truther movement is being fooled by this because they're like, yes, he's going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. Yes, he's going to get rid of income tax. But all of those things become redundant in the new system. Mm-hmm. This new digital system that of course, they're going to discard all the old stuff. So this is very interesting moments in history because I remember before my dad passed, he asked me one of the greatest questions. How do you know that you're not aiding in all of this by exposing it all? Well, here we are now. We see that, yes, we are exposing it all, but we have to have a sense of nuance. We can't be looking at this necessarily in black and white as much as we normally do. I mean, this is a false dilemma to be involved in right or wrong, black or white, so it's up to us here to raise our awareness. And there's never been a better time to do it quickly than now. So when we think, well, this could take forever, this could be generational. No, I think that this here is a giant wake-up pill. When I've been sharing this with leftists that are selling their Teslas, and it gets them going because they're against Musk and this bromance that's going on with Trump. And then we can actually activate the liberal left, which are progressives, against the Technate of America. If you showed them this, because this is like red meat to them. And so they're combining Trudeau's liberal left progressives in Canada with Trump's progressive right wing in America. Now, these are two disparate groups that you'd think would never combine, but when you look at progressivism, preparedness, efficiency, and trust the science, that's how they combine.
And everyone's like, I've never seen an administration move this fast. I've never seen a president sign this many executive orders back to back. This is wonderful. Is it? There be a reason why he's doing this so quickly? They're trying to accelerate this, to expedite the New World Order.
Yep, and the last time that somebody didn't waste any time putting in all kinds of executive orders, the moment they got into office, was Woodrow Wilson. And what did he do? But he signed in the Federal Reserve, taxation, surveillance, bills on, he creates the military-industrial complex with the executive order to create the War Industries Board, the public-private enterprise. I mean, we can look at under the arms of Lincoln at his memorial. Under both hands are fasces. So the fascism is the economic model chosen by the progressives here. Is, totalitarianism comes from fascists. So if they're going to want a total control, total global governance, fascism is the necessary economic model. And we're seeing that they had a love affair with El Duce back in the 20s, and even in the 1910s, Wilson goes and visits Italy before the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. So you can see that they're arranging everything. And so for a guy like me, sitting in the position that I am, having done the research that I've done and used historical method to verify artifacts and use primary source material, use deductivity over inductivity, use objective reasoning instead of subjectivity, I'm sitting here saying this all makes sense. This is all just unfolding just like it is in my mind. It's a little bit surreal. So I'm hoping that everybody from this video can start to go and look. And you go to bulletproofpub.com, you sort of consume that 10-part Rise of the Expert series. You'll see how this was all done through the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice. We've talked about all of this in previous shows. And you'll start to see how there's an ominous continuity to today. And all we have to do is call them on their language. Every time they say climate change, ask them to define what that means. Every time they say sustainability, ask them what that means. Catch them, and when they say new, ask them what that means, right? So we can, as far as I'm concerned, we can clearly see that our national sovereignty in here in Canada, whether that's something that you want to keep or not, and same with America, is on the table for negotiating right now.
Well, I know you're in Canada, but what are some of the things that you've seen as it pertains to the sleight of hand that's occurring? Some of the things that your normal citizen is not paying attention to, that's getting excited over all these wonderful things that Trump is doing, but should be paying attention to some of the things going on in the background.
Yeah, well, I would say every day there's something new. Every time that he is writing an executive order, I can show you how that is actually a trick. Like we talked about him getting rid of income tax. Well, in a universal basic income, where money isn't anymore the object, it's a energy credit system put forward by Howard Scott. What's the need for an income tax system anymore? It's old. So they're going to usher that out to the cheers of all of us truth people. But what they're going to impose with the hand that's not looking is this digital universal basic income, CBDCs or whatever they're called. So all of these things that we've been warning about, digital currencies, they're moving to a decentralized system themselves. And really, when you look at the first spread of manifest destiny across America, it was a distributive network. It wasn't centralized. You look at the cities and how they're connected. Indianapolis branches off, and all of these major cities branch off into all kinds of different avenues. So, just the fact that Trudeau is stepping down and is still running things is, highly problematic. But that's one example. And then, the fact that DOGE, the government efficiency department, is in the news so much, it's kind of a red flag. And so you see Elon Musk in the Oval Office holding court and Trump just listening. That was pretty profound for me. We see a lot of Trump fans sort of apologizing, making excuses for this behavior. And then I also see a lot of people going, why the hell are we listening to Musk? We didn't vote for him. Now, that's a great question, because this is how it happened. This is why we were controlled during COVID, not by our elected officials, but by the opinion of the scientific expert. So we have not lived in a democracy. Your vote has not counted since before your grandfather was born. It doesn't matter who is watching this and how old you are. Your grandfather was born into this just the same as we are. So if we really want to flip this and we want to be the generation of heroes, we need to think a little bit deeper. We need to understand the progressive era.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about possible solutions. The people that gravitate towards these positions of power, they seem to be essentially psychopaths, and they don't understand the true human condition. They're putting forward ideas and policy based on what they desire for themselves, power and greed, and it has nothing to do with what's beneficial for humanity. How do we get people that have the best interest of other human beings into positions of power when it seems like folks like us don't want to have anything to do with that? And that's mainly because we see how corrupt the system is. It would take a complete collapse of everything to start rebuilding with a positive foundation towards everything. So, of course, the first steps we can take is clean our own houses, take care of our own lives, check out of as much as possible without harming ourselves, move out of smart cities, don't participate with any nonsense, don't buy toxic food, these things that we talk about all the time. But it seems like they're rolling forward with this no matter what we do. They've already put all the pieces in place, and they've obviously been planning this for a very long time. They're going off of this playbook, and it seems to be rolling forward no matter what. What do you think the solutions are?
Well said, first of all. I would say that first thing we do is educate ourselves. Okay. We all talk about the education and the knowledge that was removed from our education system, our K through 12. We understand that we were all deliberately dumbed down, and this is why, because they wanted us disinterested. This is the word that they use. They wanted us disinterested in our political environment. And in that void came the scientific expert opinion. And that built blissful ignorance. And within that blissful ignorance is a degree inherently built into that approach to life in which we can be exploited, that is directly proportionate to how much you trust that authority. Okay. So we first have to first of all, get the knowledge that they removed from us. That's step one. And what is that? But that's, understanding Latin, understanding the Greek classics, because there's a lot of analogy and metaphor in there for us to understand. Latin makes up 80% of our English language today, basically, if you want to include medical and science. And people will tell you that it's a dead language, but the secrets are there. So the main body of knowledge that we need to learn is the liberal arts. We had John Taylor Gatto and Charlotte Iserbyt. These are two prominent figures in the Western education system, both teachers. Iserbyt was under Reagan in the education department, and they both put out famous books now about the dumbing down of America. And they said that it all pivots around the liberal arts. And, part 9 or part 10 of the Rise of the Expert series, we approach this and show that if we were to actually start teaching people grammar, logic, and rhetoric to begin with, by the time you're out of elementary school, you would never have been fooled by any of this. So that means that by the time you're not even a teenager, these politicians' lies wouldn't work on you if you understood logical fallacy, which is chapter 9 of the Trivium. So the Trivium and the Quadrivium, this is the education that they use in Freemasonry. They use it in the Kabbalah, and they've put it at the highest echelons of the American university system. Something that was common knowledge prior now is at the finish line. So we all normally would start with this. Now they're only letting the richest and the ones that they've identified as the most important and usable tools to that information. So you see a lot of these people that run our country, a lot of these social engineers actually have Master of Arts degrees, because then you become a master artist of creating propaganda, right? So they've used that knowledge to use in a bad, malevolent way. Now we infuse everybody with the Trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric. We give them the ability to properly put words and symbols together into sentences into paragraphs, and paragraphs into whole works of like a composition that is totally understandable. So you paid me a compliment at the beginning of the show saying that a lot of our presentation is easy to understand. Well, this is why, because I've taken this information, and that was one of the first things I did, is that I had to learn this language, this knowledge, and I'm nowhere near finished yet. I'm just scratching the surface, and look at how powerful we can become, and how our style and rhetoric can become beautiful, and how we no longer get caught in right, wrong scenarios. We no longer look stupid. We just present information, and we do it in a calm, reasonable manner. We're not here to inflame. We're here to, temper people's emotions, because emotions take us away from the truth. So this is the education. This is what that knowledge teaches us. All of those abilities to be graceful, to be knowledgeable, to be powerful, right? What's the saying? A well-developed individual is a perfect antidote to a tyrannical government. So this is the first thing we need to do, is take responsibility for our actions and our beliefs. Put our nose in the Trivium and just start reading it. It at first is something that, you might get through 2 or 3 pages and just be like, wow. But this is your introduction to that information we should have had when we were 5, 6, 7 years old. So,
yeah.
before we worry about anything else, we first of all have to be smart enough to know the differences between the institutions we want to remove and the ones we want to keep. I would say that anything that is social science research should probably be on the chopping block right now, because this is them studying us, figuring out our behaviors, and then using applied science and Norbert Wiener's feedback loop to then steer us like a ship in the wind. So I would say, and this all comes from the German Historical School, Prussia, just like our K through 12 education. And it was meant to demoralize us. It was meant to degenerate the West. Inserting social science into law, we go into that in number 6, and that's all directed by a 33rd degree Freemason. It's not conspiracy theory. Nathan Roscoe Pound was the head of the Massachusetts Freemasonic Lodge, the most influential lodge in the Western Hemisphere. So social science is something that we need to look at. Obviously, we're going to need institutions. We need to educate our youth. This is really the cornerstone of a healthy society, is educating our youth with the proper information. So right there, if we were just to draw a line and say, okay, every kid from here on out gets the trivium in grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of a sudden we have a bunch of kids you don't have to worry about, because they've learned all the names of the lies, whether it's an ad hominem or a argument from authority or a red herring. All of these are meant to distract us and keep us away from the truth. So the way that you find the truth is you remove contradiction, you remove falsity of fact, and you remove logical fallacy. And so these things really help us all of a sudden to start to see. So in the year 2025, we're about 4 or 5 generations of a Xerox copy, right? Yeah. So I don't think that it would be responsible of us right now to just start making wholesale changes without knowing what is going on. Now, it would take us a month to read that book and fully understand ourselves. So in a month, even less than that, depends on how badly you want it, we can really, by the springtime, start to make real decisions in our life. And I think that voting isn't going to help. We talk about hopium, voting harder. All of these things have failed and failed and failed and failed. I think that we need to activate. You know, we saw a lot of people show up for rallies during COVID, and that got so huge. It was amazing here in Canada with the truckers that, I really feel like this is the next wave. We're going to have to get out in the streets again and make noise about this.
One more thing I would add is that technology itself is a tool. And the way it's being used is in very malevolent ways. It's only being used to benefit those in power. But they have plenty of people who are working on amazing technologies that benefit humanity. Unfortunately, a lot of people get disappeared, or something awful will happen to them, or their research whenever they're developing these things. But I think those things are slowly starting to change. I see a lot of brilliant engineers and scientists developing technology that is extremely benefit for humanity. And I think maybe the key to that is get it open sourced as soon as possible with trusted colleagues, so that if we have something extremely beneficial for humanity and it's out there, it can't just be taken away. It's common knowledge for most people to have this type of technology. So that's something else I would add. I think we can do amazing things with technology if it's in the right hands.
Yeah, and that is really what it comes down to, because I'm having a lot of people say, so you're against progress? How are we going to stop that? That's not it. It's this crossing of the line into realms that we shouldn't be in.
Yes.
Like AI, like singularity, like bringing man and machine together. And this, I'm actually not even all that opposed to having a international railway that goes over the Bering Sea that connects us all. I'm actually not. If we're going to go into this international realm, it's probably best to do that. However, we must contemplate the overall international movement and whether it is healthy for humanity itself. we've kind of skipped over that. This is the magic of progress, that wheel never stops turning. This is why there's no time to ask questions. They've applied Comte's positivism to it. They're positive that the direction they've chosen is correct and the future is perfect. This is how they talk. And so we're at an hour.
Yeah.
Did you want to go a little bit longer? Because I would like to tie this
Sure,
back
we got a few
to
more minutes. Go
Brandeis.
for it.
Okay, cool. So scientific management was coined by the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court Justice. That's him right there, Louis Dembitz Brandeis. He changes his middle name in his 50s in honor of his Zionist uncle. Okay. Brandeis is running Zionism. At the same time, he's infiltrating this Taylor Society. So if anybody's unfamiliar with Taylorism, this is one of the most influential isms of the 20th century. This is where they scientifically managed everybody. And there were wars fought, okay? People were getting taken from their homesteads and their homes where they were building or surviving on their own labor, and they were forced into factories, and there were wars over this. So this is an era of history that very few know about. I'm just going to sort of flash through this because it shows direct influence from Skull and Bones. So Russell Sage Foundation is funding this book here, Fatigue and Efficiency, and all of the books that Brandeis and the National Consumers League are putting out in this direction. Brandeis is the one to set precedent in surveillance, sterilization. So this is the origins of the eugenics program, rights to privacy, sedition. He lays the groundwork for the New World Order. And who does he use but these people here? Florence Kelly, Josephine Goldmark. They're all, she's a daughter of Joseph Goldmark, who's another very influential figure. Where do all this come from? But Bohemia, a place called Brandeis on the Elbe is where the Brandeis family comes from. So it leaves very little doubt as to whether they're an aristocracy or not. I think that, if you come from a place that shares your name, you're probably pretty important in that region. Brandeis comes from a line of Frankist leaders. So Frankism is an antinomian, degenerate following that believes in redemption through sin. They sleep with their daughters. They marry their second cousins and all of these kinds of things. And that is exactly what Brandeis does. He marries his second cousin.
Jesus. And
she helps bring him into the fold, into this National Consumers League. Yeah. See? And Josephine Goldmark's work as a reformer in the progressive era did much to redesign the American social contract. So we're saying that these guys are the ones that actually created this modern day social contract that we're all pissed off about. It's the progressives. So you can see we're using source material.
Yeah.
Somebody's written about the Brandeis Brief. This is what totally overhauled American law. It's called the Brandeis Brief. And anybody will tell you that Brandeis was the main practitioner of sociological jurisprudence, this application of social science. Instead of arguing things on law now, Chris, we're going to argue them on stats and data and facts and subjectivity. The first Brandeis Brief had over 100 pages, and there was very, very few of a legal argument. We see where even the judge in that case, when he was making his final conclusion, stated these things, that Brandeis was setting a new precedent with copious collections of facts and statistics, but technically speaking, they weren't authorities in and of themselves. So this is exactly what we see today with Black Lives Matter and all of these movements. They're using these pseudo-race related arguments, and it all comes from the progressive era. And we've been sitting here for over 100 years being fooled by it. And I'm telling you, if it's within my power and my energy, we are going to flip this. I've been a cycle breaker. I think many truthers out there are cycle breakers, and this is our mission. We've got to make sure that people see this. So I invite you to go look at any of these sources. Fabian Freeway goes deep into Brandeis' involvement with the Fabian Society. This is what Brandeis really creates here in America, is the industrial democracy. This is what founding Fabian talked about. This is his book, Industrial Democracy by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. The Great Society that was written by another Fabian founder, Graham Wallace. Very close friends with Walter Lippmann, who's another pioneer progressive, who we consider today the founder of modern journalism. So these things start to connect in ways that blow your mind. And they all live together. We've covered this, the House of Truth, one of the episodes we did, I remember with you, maybe have been even the first episode I ever did with you was on the House of Truth, because I felt like that's really where we needed to start, where they flipped the definition of liberalism from classic liberalism and our, the rugged individual, the well-developed individual, our ability to speak, think, and assemble freely, to neoliberalism and this want for more centralized government and a giant nanny state and the government to help us. This is what we're seeing now. And so they've totally 180 degrees flipped the definition of liberalism to today, where all we see is people using that term liberal, all those libtards, all those damn liberals, those Democrats, the leftists, right? Left retards, all of these things, they really mean progressives, because anytime you add radical social reform to liberalism, you're talking progressivism. So these are very important things to understand, that, we will not get fooled anymore once we see these things. So Frederick Winslow Taylor is the author of this book. Brandeis commandeers him and the entire movement. Today, Brandeis is considered the coiner of the term scientific management. Within 4 years of the publication of that book, Frederick Winslow Taylor dies of pneumonia? Influenza. And many people are dying around Brandeis and Frankfurt, I would like to say. A lot of these guys that bring in this technology are murdered. So you want to talk using technology malevolently? This is really what we see with the Taylor Society. Both Frederick Winslow Taylor and Robert Grosvenor Valentine, sort of the two guys that bring labor and capital together, both die right after they bring this technology. And these, people, they've brought attorneys and all kinds of social engineers together on this problem. How do we bring labor and capital together? And it was those two that were the ones that rose to the top with their idea, and that's what finally got them together. And those two were dead within less than a half a decade. So it's my personal opinion that both those men were murdered by these progressives, but of course that would be opening up a case of over 100 years ago. So,
well, it wouldn't be shocking. That seems to be the method of clearing unwanted overhead, you could say. They do the work for you. They get the technology out there, and they are no longer needed.
Yeah, and you can see here the top quote. This is how Robert Grosvenor Valentine did it. He said, in studying the resistance of organized labor to scientific management, because the workers were completely resistant against this, Valentine came to see that the objection lay not so much in the thing itself as in the fact that it was introduced by the employer and for his own advantage. So as soon as they brought the trade unionism in and they brought the union in, this is where they were able to totally manipulate the worker, because it's far easier to manipulate a board of 12 to 15 to 20 than it is to manipulate millions of workers. So Brandeis creates the protocol of peace. He's the primary author. And it says there, Brandeis described the protocol system as a large step toward industrial democracy. Okay, so this is the world that we live in, a largely scientifically managed society. Everything basically we do now. I mean, when you look at these like Amazon trucks, when they come back to the warehouse, they go underneath this lighted tunnel, and it takes a whole picture of the truck. And if that truck got into an accident or had a ding of any type on its trip out in the last 8 to 10 hours, it identifies it right there. So we are getting to about as efficient as we possibly could be. Right on. So industrial democracy was a term that before 1909 had significant relevance only for reformers and intellectuals. Events in progressive era New York grounded this abstract theory into the streets of the Lower East Side. The conflicts of the ladies' garment industry provided a ready-made laboratory. The Protocol of Peace, a radical trade agreement in New York City's ladies' garment industry, ushered in a new experiment with industrial democracy. So they're using Los Angeles and New York as laboratories. Once it's successful there, they spread all of this across the nation. You see in the video that we started this show, he talks about how Elon Musk's father leaves Canada, and where does he go? But Greenwich Village, and starts hanging out with all of these socialists at these same exact political salons that Walter Lippmann is hanging out in 100 years before that. So you can see that it's the same movement. They're using New York as a laboratory. Say, when the Protocol of Peace was signed on September 2nd, 1910, it ushered in a new era of industrial labor relations. That's from the American Jewish Archives. So they're commending Brandeis, they're lauding Brandeis for all of this, but really what he did was subjugate an entire nation into wage slavery. So we've got primary source material here in letters that show the involvement.
And again, if you would like to learn more about Brandeis, you did a whole presentation just on this gentleman. Yeah. I think it was either last year or even a few months ago.
Yeah, last year we started out just wanting to write an article about him because we noticed that he was the architect of the Federal Reserve. He was the main architect of Woodrow Wilson's 1912 New Freedom campaign. So that included the creation of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the groundwork for the administrative state we see today. And we also saw that he was the leader of Zionism, elected chairman of Theodore Herzl's former Provisional Executive Committee on General Zionist Affairs, and it was moved to New York, just like the Frankfurt School was moved to Columbia University. And in that video that we showed at the beginning, you can see that the technocracy starts at the Columbia University, same place the Progressive Era parasites started to conspire, and the creation of the Council on Foreign Relations, and all of this comes out of Ivy League, but especially Columbia. You see a lot of these people coming out of this is why we have a teachers college there, because it influences the entire curriculum of the nation. So there's my sources. And I got lots more. And I even say when I need a citation. So that just shows work that I need to do, but also shows the honesty of which I go about my business. I'm not here to do anything but give you the purest, most accurate information so that we can all make a decision ourselves. Much like I farm, we use water and no chemicals. We just grow it from the soil, make sure the soil is content. And man, we get vegetables coming out of there that would blow your mind. So same approach here. It's just information. So I would say that that's about all I want to say. Definitely go to bulletproofpub.com. We're seeing a lot more activity going on there. We're even on my Facebook page. We're seeing a lot of interest in this Technate that we've been talking about the last week.
Oh, yeah. This is
so come find me, Diego Garcia.
Essential information. Thank you so much for coming back on and presenting this. We will definitely continue bringing this information to the people. One more time before we close out, just remind everyone the best way to find all this essential information.
Yeah, bulletproofpub.com. You'll see the top 10 list there is the Rise of the Expert series, and I think it's the videos underneath that. So at first you can read the articles if you want, but right underneath that is the discussions that Andy and I had at the Deep Share, where we go deep into it, showing source material, getting deeper into the characters. We spend at least an hour and a half to 2 hours explaining each article. And it left us with the conclusion that this guy that you're seeing in the center of your screen right here is the maker of our modern day social contract. So the history of propaganda on YouTube.
Awesome.
And the Trivium method on Twitter. You'll see I'm a little more aggressive on Twitter. I've actually been doing some pretty interesting things there. I've been sort of lassoing groups of media and showing them the Technate and holding their feet to the fire. And so I'm trying to hold groups of journalists accountable for missing out on all of this very pertinent, important information that's both true and integral to all of us understanding. So come find me at Twitter. I kind of wield my sword a little more aggressively there. So
Awesome, man.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for
buddy.
doing what you do and bringing this information to everybody. Like I said, we'll definitely do this again. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See you then.